Okay, good morning, everybody. I know that a couple of you are coming from outside the School of Engineering. I'm Silvanus Wosu. I'm the Associate Dean for Diversity in the school. And this is the last of our event this year for Year of Diversity. And we wanted to actually end the year by bringing the best in this field. And I do want to apologize to us for our choice of date. This Friday is Memorial Day weekend. If you go to the parking lot, that was my first indication that this is going to be actually bad, you know. And so people who wanted to be here are not here today because they had to be out of town. So for you that are here, thank you. Thank you so very, very much for joining us. So we're bringing you, and I really do mean that from the bottom of my heart, the best in this journey for strategic positioning of diversity. And now we are still working on this issue in 2000. And at that time, I was looking for a very strategic way of describing the collective impact of collective vision for diversity. I believe it was in 2005 that his book came out. His book on, I believe the title was Strategic Diversity Leadership. This book is the dictionary for the work for diversity. I didn't read that. And I have had opportunity to consult with some universities. This is the book that they want to define what the functions of CDOs are, that is Chief Diversity Officers in schools. And it's so amazing that few of the places that I have visited, his name will always come up. His name will always come up. So we are I'm really pleased and honored to have him in our midst. You have his detailed bio in front of you. I would really encourage you to look at that bio. Look at how Dr. Williams, the kind of thing that he has done. And I'm telling you, we have one of maybe the smallest audience he has ever talked to. So I do appreciate him humbling himself to come. And he could not have come at a better time because the school is trying to get some intake into how do we restructure our diversity plan. And so in the afternoon session, I'm encouraging department chairs, if they are not able to make it, to at least have some faculty members to attend that session, because he will be dealing on certain issues that pertains to developing strategic plan. So it is really my pleasure to welcome him. Dr. Williams is recognized as a scholar in this field, a leader by the testimony of this very, very successful book. Very, very passionate, as you will see him sometimes. His passion is very contagious. This is a man that I have followed his work. I can never wear his shoes, he's bigger, he's taller. But at least I look at his work to really, really integrate so closely with mine. Dr. Elaine Allen here. By the way, can we give Dr. Allen a just doctorate degree, finally, and I'm very, 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 very proud of her. And so, most importantly, Dr. Williams was the recipient of 2013 National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education. Now, this is a very, very high-level national leadership group. And his word, inclusive excellence, became the buzzword for what we do. So, without wasting, we have the details of his bio there. Please, can you join me in welcoming Dr. Ben Williams.
Thank you so much. It's good to see everybody today. Look, it's rainy outside. My first flight was canceled yesterday. My second flight did not leave Atlanta till about midnight yesterday. I hit the hotel at what had to be about 2 a.m. Blessedly, it wasn't too early of a curtain call to get me going, but I am going to try to turn up a little bit here and lighten the day up and get some energy going. Can we do that today? All right. It's great to be here, and it's great to have a chance to share the gift of time together. I've got a ton of slides and thoughts that are behind me, and let you know this, everything is expressed in either Strategic Diversity Leadership or the Chief Diversity Officer, which are not quite 12 years old, but they are published in 2013. So they are available, but we will also make available a PDF of the PowerPoint. So everything I get through will be available to you. Everything I do not get through will also be available to you as well. So please rest assured of that if there's any interest in getting that information. It's great to be here and to have a chance to connect. For those of you who are active in social media, I am at DAWPhD, and I am always hashtagging Strategic Diversity Leadership and hashtagging Inclusive Excellence. As was said in the bio, these are concepts that I've had a chance to be a part of and to help bring into the world for more than a decade now. People, they oftentimes will say, how long have you been doing this? Since the womb. I came right out talking about strategic diversity leadership. But it has been an incredible nearly 13, 14-year journey of having the gift to travel the world and share my writing and share my research, which early on had achieved some level of interest. And so it's great to be here with you today. Again, that's where we're hashtagging. And the first concept I want to talk about as we engage in this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I will use strategic diversity leadership and diversity broadly to talk about this, but I won't say those words every single time. And I'll get into naming and word conventions and all that good stuff, but I will use broader terminology to capture lots of concepts, and I go into great detail of why I do that. But the first thing I talk about is this idea of innovating diversity. One of my favorite books is written by Hayden and Christensen of the Harvard University Business School, and it's titled The Innovator's DNA. By show of hands, how many of you, if any of you, have ever heard of The Innovator's DNA? No? Okay, one person has. If there's one additional book you should have on your shelf other than Strategic Diversity Leadership, it would probably be The Innovator's DNA. Really, really wonderful book, and this is the reason why. They asked very simple research questions, and I believe some of the greatest research comes out of simple questions. One of the questions that they asked was, what makes an innovator, right? Whether you're innovating in the technology sector, you're innovating in the finance sector, you're innovating at K through 12 level, you're innovating in higher education, you're innovating in not-for-profits, you're innovating in diversity. What makes an innovator an innovator? And they isolated into these 5 key themes of innovators that I want to share with you, because I think that all of us at some level are trying to innovate around issues of diversity. One of the things that early on made my work rather novel is I was trying to bring the conversation of strategy and change and organizational development and leadership to the conversation of diversity, equity, and inclusion. In many ways in higher education, kind of the core kind of analytical basis that was there had been more historical. It had been more sociological. It had in many ways been more social psychological, dare we say in some ways even anthropological, but we had not applied the organizational sciences to the conversation of diversity, equity, and inclusion the same way. Obviously, it emerged out of a legal and policy route, and so that was one of the things I wanted to do very early on. So a lot of my early thinking was really looking at lots of different theories and trying to apply those to a new context of diversity, particularly diversity in the higher education arena. The innovator's DNA, one of the first characteristics that is offered in talking about innovators is this idea that innovators are always questioning the world. Questioning the world. What? Why? Why not? Why can't we diversify our faculty? Why don't we have any women who are full professors? Why don't we have more underrepresented minorities that are students in the undergraduate program? Why haven't we been able to ever graduate an African American or a Latina in computer science? They're asking the question why. So innovation begins, I think, with a process of questioning yourself, but also interrogating the data in your organizational context to try to move towards change. The second aspect of innovators, searching and reapplying, looking for solutions anywhere you can find them. One of the things that I did a long time ago is I threw away disciplinary anchors. I threw away analytical conventions. I will go to any theory, I will go to any space, I will go to any organization to try to find something that's working and trying to reapply it over here. So you're constantly looking for solutions, right? One of the things that is very difficult in higher education from a strategy perspective is oftentimes strategy in higher education means try to mirror what your benchmark institutions are doing. So it's strategy by copycatting. Every single institution in the country has a group of benchmark institutions. Most institutions in the country have a sense of their aspirational institutions that they aspire to be like or to reach. I'll never forget when I was at the University of Connecticut as a fairly young professional, and our president stood boldly on the cover of the Chronicle, and it stated very demonstratively, the University of Connecticut wants to be top 20. And I'll never forget looking at it and thinking, well, but where is the top 20 going? They're not leaving that top 20. University of Connecticut can be greater than it is, but chances are if you're trying to just mirror what someone else is doing, then that doesn't necessarily provide for you a point of difference, and it's points of difference that allow you to have competitive advantage. You want to minimize things that you got to have, all your points of parity, but your points of difference give you competitive advantage. So innovators are always looking for solutions across space and time. They're always trying to search and reapply. The third thing about innovators, and this is why I love the opportunity to come to conferences or to come to institutions, is innovators understand that they have to be in the company of other innovators to drive their innovation hotspots. That's why Silicon Valley looks like Silicon Valley. That's why we have the emergence of the new Silicon Valley in Vegas. That's why we have emerging tech centers in LA or the tech village in Atlanta. It's because individuals who are at the bleeding edge of trying to figure out what's next understand they want to be around those other persons doing the same thing. It's one of the reasons that great universities like the University of Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon University are hotspots for attracting others because they drive the economic engine. And what we know is we have to be nested in the same innovation ecosystem. So if you're trying to innovate diversity, you have to find an ecosystem where you can tap into energy and ideas. Next week, phenomenal conference happening down in Dallas, National Conference on Race and Ethnicity. Several thousand persons will be there. I went to that conference every year for almost 17 years in a row because it was like an oasis in the desert, because it allowed me to go to this oasis and be around other folks trying to innovate, trying to disrupt, trying to cut against the grain. The fourth idea in terms of innovating is innovators are always experimenting with new ideas, right? So one of the things I say is that in the diversity space, like most spaces where you're trying to get things done, you have to have a bias towards action and a bias towards doing. Too often, I have seen that our diversity efforts, they oftentimes will stall because we get bogged down in the conversation of it, right? Or we get bogged down in the throwing of the penalty flags. I want to throw the penalty flag of homophobia. I want to throw the penalty flag of racism. Oh, I'm going to throw the penalty flag of sexism. I'm going to throw the penalty flag of this person doesn't know the perfect word to use in the conversation, and so therefore very little gets done, right? The thing I always say about diversity efforts, the thing I say about change efforts have to be driven by a bias towards action. Particularly in the 21st century where everything is moving faster than ever before, and we've got to be moving in a way that we're taking ideas and moving them into the marketplace of our institutions, moving them into the marketplace of our worlds as fast as possible to get things going. So you're trying to develop pilots, you're trying to develop demonstration efforts, you're trying to get energy going. The other piece of this is once you figure out what works, the question becomes how do we take the ideas to scale, right? Once you figure out what works, how do you get big with that idea? Now, I said I was going to apply the theory to diversity, equity, inclusion issues, strategic diversity leadership. Now, as a good academician, you can't just steal the theory. You have to extend the knowledge, right? So I had to extend the knowledge. So I ask you, what do you think was the sixth key ingredient that I thought was so important to extend Hayden and Christensen's theory of innovation for leadership? What do you think that sixth theory was? Anybody who would like to share that? Do no 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 no. Do no 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 no. Do no 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 no. Make it real. Okay. What else we got? Make it real. Yes, ma'am. Engaging the community. Need community input. What else?
Changing the culture from the inside.
They have to have an orientation to changing the culture from the inside. What else? What is this sixth characteristic? Again, we've got innovators are questioning. They're looking for solutions. They're engaging other innovators. They're experimenting with new ideas. They take their ideas to scale. What's the sixth thing that innovators are always doing if they're innovating in the diversity space? Yes, sir.
Failing and trying again?
Unfortunately, yes. That would be true. But the sixth characteristic that I found that is always present with respect to diversity issues, whether you're talking about Dr. King innovating or you're talking about a first-year student who has decided that something is amiss in the student experience of their campus climate in their dormitory. There is a thread that connects them. Because soon as Dr. King decided to act and soon as that student decided to elevate, they led with this sixth dimension, and they lead with courage. There's never been diversity innovation that happens absent some courage, absent someone speaking out in a faculty search committee saying, I think we can get a more diverse applicant pool. I think we need to continue forward with the search. Absent someone saying, you know what? I know there's not a person of color that's around, but that joke was a little off-putting to me. I'm going to elevate something and say it. You know, that comment regarding that woman in traditional Muslim garb, I don't find that to be appropriate. I'm going to speak out and say something. You know what? I'm a full professor with an endowed chair and more research dollars than God. You know, I believe that I can be a person that can really help to champion some of this diversity stuff because I have so much capital. And I'm going to give some of that capital up to engage others who might not listen, but because I'm who I am, now they will listen. Courage. And this was something that I found speciously absent from the theory, and is a part of how I've tried to extend it as I've begun to share it in different spaces across the country. So it goes back to, and for me, it begins with burning questions, right? So what are the burning questions that are the first key assumptions of innovators? For me, those burning questions begin with the following. And these are the questions that have powered my career and my life. One, what is diversity in the 21st century and why is it so important in the new economy? What is it? In strategic diversity leadership, probably the longest and most complex chapter is the what is diversity chapter. That chapter, I tell you, it just went on and 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 on. I could not stop it. And what I found was I was trying to bring some simplicity to what's a very complex idea, right? So if I were to poll this room and ask the group that is here today, define diversity for me. Some would say it's race. Some would say it's gender equity. Others would say it's embracing the diversity of everyone. Someone else would say, you know, it's about moving beyond those diverse identities that separate us. It's about our commonality and what combines us. Someone yet still differently would say, I don't see color. You know, I don't see difference. Some would say, you know what, it's all these different issues, but what it really is about is the greatest travesty is happening in our country, and it's the Holocaust. I mean, everybody has all these different dimensions of diversity. And you know what I say? Everybody's right. All those things are a part of a discussion of diversity, right? So oftentimes I found committees across the country that'll get bogged down in the first conversations of trying to define diversity. Because what's happening is they're not just balancing against all these different diverse groups that they want to build into their definition. What lies underneath that is these different diversity ideologies. A diversity ideology of racialization, a diversity ideology of universalism, a diversity ideology of colorblindedness, a diversity ideology of reverse racism. All these ideologies rest underneath the discussion, and what happens in these meetings is they start crashing up against folks. And that's the reason why I go back to my theory of innovation. Because if you're approaching it with this mindset, you won't get stopped in the mess of talking about the challenge and the difficulties of moving through the work. You can move through the work when you're focused on the innovation idea. So the first question for me is, what is diversity? The second one is, how do we engage this broad conversation of diversity, right? Race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, gender, nationality, religion, diversity of background, diversity of thought, diversity of experience on campus. How do we engage this broad conversation of diversity and not lose sight of specific differences and group needs? How do we do that? That is a burning question for me, and I've struggled with that question through the years. I'll never forget, I had recently arrived at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I was a 34-year-old vice provost and associate chancellor for, at the time, diversity and campus climate. My portfolio expanded substantively and went from a span of control of about 30 to a span of control of about 300 over the course of the 5 years that I was there. But when I first got there, the university was so nested in a racialized politics of diversity. I'll never forget the flack that I got when I told the media that I was not the vice provost for blackness, I was the vice provost for diversity. Why did Vice Provost Williams say that? Oh, I was persona non grata. I know who I am, and I know that issues of race, ethnicity, issues of African American inequity are a huge priority. In the same instance, too, that does not mean that we can't also make other dimensions of the conversation of huge priority. The question for me as a chief diversity officer is, at the end of the day, when I run the totality of what I've engaged over the year or over multiple years, can I point to me having skewed to the right issues in lots of different spaces? And I showed a broad-based humanity and love for others in what I was trying to get done. That's how I judge myself. A part of that wisdom and a part of that insight for me came in a conversation that I had with Cornel West. Many of you know who Cornel West is, know who Dr. West is. His work has kind of jumped from the academy to pop culture through the years. Very, very well-known scholar, theologian. I had a chance to interact with Dr. West, not once, not twice, but probably about 7 times over the course of my development from an undergrad up to being a young professional. One of those times I had picked him up from the airport, and I was driving him back, and he was killing this Zingerman's turkey sandwich, the way some of you just smashed your lunch. He was killing his Zingerman sandwich. And I was talking to Dr. West, and I asked him this question. And at the time, I was really grappling with my own identity and how I was showing up, and I was angry because issues of power and privilege and inequity, my identity as an African-American man was coming into full bloom, and I was mad. And I asked him very directly, I said, Dr. West, I said, why do you refer to everybody, irrespective of their race and ethnicity, as your brother or your sister? And you'll notice if I was walking around, I was like, sister so-and-so, brother so-and-so, and that is a direct outgrowth of my interactions with Dr. West. And he said to me, he said, Damon, he said, at the end of the day, all these things happen. All these bad things have happened. But at the end of the day, we come into the world and we leave the world the same. He said, and the more that we focus on that humanity, and the more we focus on that broad envelope of love, the more we can have the hard conversations that need to be had on different group issues. Now, that may sound kind of soft, but what I found is it's so real. Early in my career, I would come in and all I would talk about was the strategy, the structure, the process, the change, the accountability techniques, the incentive techniques, and I'm going to get to all that. As I've evolved, what I also have come to understand is the importance of the love and the importance of the relationships and the importance of the healing that has to happen. Because when you're in these diversity conversations, there's a lot of pain. When that individual starts crying in the meeting and you see it, it's because of the pain. When the person gets irate or passionate, not irate, but just passionate, it's because of the pain. And so the only thing that allows us to work our way through the pain is more love. Now, the only thing that allows us to get things done is more strategy, right? The love and the strategy. And we're going to get to all that today. This other piece, again, what does it mean to lead strategically on these issues? I'll never forget, I was at the University of Michigan when the beginning ideas of writing the book, The Chief Diversity Officer, started to emerge for me. And I was a doctoral student, and I wanted to do my dissertation research on this concept of what I at the time was referring to as senior diversity officers. And I was enamored with this concept of how there could be an individual at the University of Michigan who was the vice provost for academic and multicultural affairs, and he had in his portfolio admissions, financial aid, new student programs, military services, the Office of Minority Affairs, the Center for Teaching and Learning, and he had the portfolio for faculty diversity, and he sat on the Committee for Institutional Cooperation's Chief Diversity Officer Group, the Senior Diversity Officer Group. So the CIC is all the Big Ten institutions, and all the provosts sit together, all the presidents sit together, all the deans sit together, all the chief diversity officers sit together. So he sat on this committee representing Michigan. But at another institution, it was an individual with no PhD who was the affirmative action officer. At another institution, it was an individual who was a faculty appointee working on a 3-year faculty appointed 50% contract. One person had an institutional budget of north of 9 figures. The other had an institutional budget of less than 5 figures. At institutions that were point of parity in terms of their mission, their complexity, and their resource level. As Arsenio Hall would say, that just makes you say, right? It struck me, right? How this dissonance could live inside of the entirety of this landscape. And it was like that across the country. So this was in the mid-90s. And so that's where inception happened for me to ultimately write do the research on Chief Diversity Officer, and then ultimately write the book, The Chief Diversity Officer, which published in 2013. It started in the mid-90s. Now, my dissertation advisor told me, he said, Damon, he said, you can do that dissertation, that study for your dissertation, but you will be here much longer to complete that study. Or you can look at this wonderful data set that we have and do this longitudinal secondary analysis, and we can get you out of here in 6 months. Needless to say, I skewed towards the data set and put that research project to the side, but didn't lose sight of wanting to engage and to do it. And this newer question that I'm really, really passionate about now, and it is a part of the title for this session, is how do we embrace the realities of what I refer to as the centennial generation, those born 1997 through to today, who are coming next behind millennials. Millennials, centennials, some refer to them as Generation Z. In my current role, I shape the learning experience of roughly 4 million young people around the world through my work at the Boys and Girls Clubs of America as Senior VP and Chief Education Officer. So I lead a portfolio that has 4 vertically integrated national centers: the National Center for Ed Foundations and Academic Innovation, the National Center for Health, Wellness, and Gender Youth Development, the National Center for Leadership, Character, and Impact, and the National Center for Teens, College, and Workforce Development. Each of those centers is led by a national VP. Each of those centers is capitalized and has brought in and generated north of $30+ million each. Some of them much more than that. And so I've got everything in the portfolio from efforts that are focused on teaching young people physical literacy skills, which is how to swing, how to run, how to jump, healthy eating habits, all the way through to a 7-figure grant from Comcast NBC Universal, which is developing the first digital engaged learning platform for Boys and Girls Club youth to be able to engage in self-directed STEM-related experiences, digital badging, having identity profiles, collecting them in a national ecosystem, in a global ecosystem that young people who are in Germany or young people who are in Alabama, if they're club youth, they can be sharing their work and connected. So that portfolio is very broad, and that portfolio is all around embracing the realities of the centennial generation, which is the most diverse generation ever. Diverse in terms of race, diverse in terms of ethnicity, diverse in terms of sexuality, diverse. And I'm going to get into that today because that helps to frame the why of this work. And this last question, which was in some ways alluded to in the prior slide, which is, why are there so many conversations of diversity, but seemingly so little results? I mean, we just talk about it, don't we? And you still look around and you don't see the outcomes of it. Now, we'll never get to this utopian, perfect society. Diversity is a space where it is a continuing work in progress. In the same instance, too, I am a strong believer in our indicators of success and progress, and we should be tracking and monitoring them just like we are with everything else, and we should see progress over time and change and shift. I'll never forget when I was at the University of Connecticut and we were developing that institution's first major diversity plan, and we were delivering that plan to the board of trustees of the university, and the chairman of the board, he was a managing consultant, a managing partner for what at the time was Arthur Andersen Consulting, one of the major consulting firms, you know, MBA from Wharton or Chicago or somewhere, you know, business guy, change management guy, strategy guy. I never forget, we put up for him what the diversity numbers were for African American, Latino, Native American faculty members on tenure track in 1972 when my boss had joined the institution. And we put that same data up in 2002 when I had joined the institution. And it was like 26 then and like 34 now. Now, some would cry pipeline. That ain't pipeline. That's strategy. That's intentionality. That's consistency. And he sat there, and I remember him looking at us like we were from this other alien planet, because he's a change management guy. He's like, this makes no sense to me. We can do something about that. And hence, the Board of Trustees Diversity Plan was born. So these are the burning questions that power my career. These are the burning questions that power my writing. I have a new monograph that I will make available to all of you, and hopefully it gets disseminated more broadly across campus. And I'll talk about a little bit: voice, choice, access, and passion, preparing the centennial generation for leadership, which is the foreshadow publication to what will be my next book, which I hope to get out in 2018 on centennials. And so we wrote Diversity Leadership Set, Strategic Diversity Leadership, and the Chief Diversity Officer with my dear colleague, Dr. Katrina Wade Golden, who was co-author on CDO, who is an Assistant VP and Deputy Chief Diversity Officer at the University of Michigan, one of the most brilliant scholars I've ever encountered in my life. And the first conversation we always would talk about in the book, but also when I come and meet with institutions, is this idea of how is diversity framed, right? How are we framing it? Framing it both in terms of the strategic context, framing it definitionally, framing it tactically, operationally in terms of how we move the agenda forward. So when I talk about this bigger frame, this broader external strategic frame, one of the things I like to talk about is this idea of a perfect storm that is blowing so hard right now, not just in our country, but in our world, which is expanding the conversation of diversity significantly. So the first chapter, Strategic Diversity Leadership, is a policy chapter which talks about the perfect storm. One of the things that is shifting the conversation of diversity that maybe we're not thinking about or talking about as much is technology and social media. I mean, and the fact that we're in the College of Engineering, a place where I'm sure you have a game area or some type of a network security area and probably everything else in between, this is one of the powerful forces that is reshaping the conversation of diversity, I believe. Number one, because we can create learning moments across space and time as never before. Number two, because our centennial generation is consuming upwards of 9 hours of content a day, and in some ways are more comfortable interacting in digital spaces than they are in material, lived, real-world spaces. At the same time that they're the most diverse generation ever. Technology is the enabler for what I refer to as the digital intuitive nature of the centennials. Millennials, we refer to them as digital native. Centennials, I'm referring to them as digital intuitives, and I'll get into what I mean when I talk about that. Other dynamics that are shifting, empowering, and elevating diversity as an area of importance, the changed demographics. When we look at the centennials, they're already majority minority. When we look at the centennials, we have research at Boys and Girls Clubs of America that was collected recently, which is suggesting that as many as 20+% of centennials are either LGBTQ, questioning, or uncomfortable expressing their sexuality in a survey. Over 20%. Preliminary, right? My understanding, we're probably the first to ever collect data like this in this way. This represents a real sea change. We just released our first LGBTQ inclusion toolkit to our clubhouses in the history of this country. Why? Because these young persons are a generation of saying, I'm not going into a closet. I'm not going to not be who I am. I am going to love and live more fluidly than ever we've seen before. And in some instances, I'm going to choose to manifest my physical identity in the ways that I feel God put me in this world, and those are transgender. That dynamic is shifting the landscape at the K through 12 level, and it is blowing very prominently towards our institutions. In addition to the racial, the international, the nationality, the religion. Another powerful force that's blowing very hard, what I refer to as Trump-lash. And I'm going to get into Trump-lash just a bit. But political and legal threats to diversity, right? More and more we see these political and legal threats to diversity, which cause a policy ripple effect that institutions have to respond to, right? So if the Office of Civil Rights strengthens the Title IX enforcement, the gender equity enforcement policies, institutions have to respond. If a legal case is ruled at Michigan or at UT Austin regarding the use of race ethnicity as a competitive admissions factor in a selective admissions process, institutions have to respond. That dynamic, I believe, is going to quicken, particularly driven by Trump-lash. Persistent societal and educational inequalities. We have yet to overcome the lasting effects of racial segregation, the lasting effects of slavery. We have a society that is more stratified by race ethnicity than ever before. Stratified by gender as well, but race ethnicity than ever before. One of the themes that I talk about a lot is the boys of color crisis that is facing our country right now. Boys of color, African Americans, Latino, Native American boys, Southeast Asian boys, indicators so horrific across nearly every strata. Latino boys more likely to drop out of high school before any other group. African American boys more likely to be killed on the streets or to be incarcerated more than any other group. Native American boys more likely to be addicted to legal or illegal drugs before leaving high school than any other group. We have a crisis that is happening right now. Nationally, if you were to take the African American athletes off the Division I teams, what would you have left at most of our institutions? We see the constriction that is happening. The fact that nearly 90% of all black families are being raised in communities where the children are being raised without a father in the home, single parent households. And this is not something that I am saying as a matter of sensationalism. These are matters of demographic fact. Now, I also know tremendous numbers of fathers who are raising their children and all those things. I'm just talking about the data and the demographic reality. And these are all forces that at the end of the day we have to respond to because we live in this global knowledge economy. We live in an economy, obviously, where it has constricted. Colleges of engineering understand that probably more than any. In my family, there are 13 first cousins on my mother's side of the family. On my father's side of the family. Amongst us 13, all of us, save one, have at least one college degree. All of us, many of us went into the STEM-related fields. I have 5 cousins who are industrial engineers. They worked in Dayton, Ohio. You know what happened when the Great Recession hit. They all lost their jobs. Many of their wives were industrial engineers. They lost their jobs. And they were faced with the constriction that was happening in a very real and material way to go other places. If they experienced that, then just imagine what others experienced who were not as degreed, who were not as credentialed. One of the things that we see thematically in our survey research on centennials is that they are hyper concerned about their future. One of the things that's similar, in some ways, centennials, their survey data responses are very different than millennials. Millennials were looking for jobs during the Great Recession. Centennials were at home with mom and dad. Or centennials were home without mom and dad, without a father, in the home. So if you were in a difficult economic circumstance, that circumstance maybe became even deeper. If you were in a middle class circumstance, maybe it bumped down. The implication is in some ways centennials are more similar to boomers in their desire to have security, in their desire to have job opportunities, in their worry and concern for the future. Millennials, and I see some millennials in the room, y'all different, you know. Millennials show up on day one, y'all gonna be running some stuff. Millennials show up on day one and expect to have a freedom and a flexibility in the workplace. Centennials in some ways want some of those things, but what they want most of is stability. And they want real pathways to opportunity, which is why Boys and Girls Clubs of America and what we're doing, particularly with our workforce initiative, we believe can be a really powerful thing. And then last and definitely not least, this idea of an educational and business case for diversity. My wife led the largest marketing campaign dedicated towards African-American women in the history of this country, My Black is Beautiful. Anybody heard of My Black is Beautiful by show of hands? A couple folks did. My wife led that national campaign, which was driven by the business case for diversity. Why? Because black women buy more beauty care products than any other demographic group on the planet. Black women got to be fine now, don't play. They buy them products. P&G understood and knew that, developed the whole campaign associated with it. You know, also inside of that, we see more and more campaigns focused towards the LGBTQ community. Every company that's a consumer packaged goods company understands that women shape the household spending habits of 70% of all households. That's why most marketing is towards women. You know what I mean? These are things that are being driven by a business case for diversity. And so now on the corporate side, you see chief multicultural officers, you see chief diversity officers, you see chief inclusion officers, you see corporate responsibility, social engagement offices. Boys and Girls Clubs of America is one of the strongest recipients of corporate responsibility dollars ever. So I managed a $30 million project with Taco Bell. We managed a $20 million project with Comcast, NBC Universal. We managed another $10 million project with the Schwab Foundation. All these different organizations make these contributions because they want to have social impact in these diverse communities because they understand this perfect storm that's powering the dynamic. Trump Lash. I put this up to in no way stump. I put this up because President Trump's leadership is shifting the discourse in this country, and I don't believe towards the positive, and it is showing up more and more on our campuses. We have a level of hate crimes and campus climate disruptions happening now more than ever before in the last 10 plus years. The Southern Poverty Law Center is tracking these things, and there was an immediate spike with the emergence of President Trump in this role of leadership. How many of you saw or heard about the student that was killed at Bowie just last week, I believe it was? African-American male standing on the street, student in the military with his friends, white male student, neo-Nazi at the institution comes up and says, you need to move over to the left now. The young man stands his ground. He's stabbed in the heart. He dies on the way to the hospital. Now, that is at the far end of what can happen. That was a terroristic, ultimate negative action that can happen. But we see more and more proliferating right now, and it's been associated with this shift in leadership. If we look at the policies, the policy missives that are coming out, the shots that are fired out, in terms of the potential building of a wall, when we talk about the travel ban on Muslim and African nations, these are all dynamics that create this climate of hostility. And like I said, this is not about stumping. I'm only speaking to matters of fact. When we look at what's being poised to happen in the budget, the elimination of the Education Outreach Office at NASA, the dialing back of $1.2 billion of after-school programs in the education budget. I mean, these are things that are going to have a dramatic impact on diverse communities, a dramatic impact on institutions and how we're poised to do these things moving forward. So clearly a part of this stuff. And, more and more than ever, one of the things that's so very significant, and I talked about social media and technology, President Trump is very different as a president from a leadership perspective. And this is what I mean by that. President Obama ran to election and to office using social media as the first president to do so. MyBarackObama.com, using social media to campaign. However, once he moved into governance, those things basically went by the wayside. President Trump is the first president to lead through social media, the first president to lead through the digital space. So therefore, in the 24/7, 365 world we live in, you can't turn him off, right? You are getting it all the time between CNN and Fox, and then his own direct communication action, which is also having another ripple effect. I just was in residency with all the chancellors, all the provost, chief diversity officers of the University of California system. So all 10 research universities, I was in residence with them for a leadership retreat. And this is one of the things I talked about with them. And it was like a light bulb went out as they were looking around the room. They was like, this is why our students expect our chancellor and our leaders to lead differently with them. Because if President Trump got time to tweet, believe you me, the expectation is that other leaders have time to be in communication because they are mobile first, digitally engaged all the time. And so again, when you look at these changes that are coming, it necessitates the importance of us having diversity crisis management strategies, preemptive communication plans and protocols in place, having hotlines and having filters that allow for students and faculty and community to elevate their voices when things happen. And I did some preliminary research at University of Pittsburgh, and I saw you have some of those systems that I could see just in the web in terms of responding to campus and elevating the voice. I don't know what happens on the back end in terms of the process, but this is a major disruptive force, which is leading to higher levels of student activism than ever before. And I believe that we're going to see even more of this on our campuses as we look now and into the future. Now, I talked about this idea of generations, and Inside this notion of generations, there's a lot of different words that are out there. I am using this centennial term, but there's others. Generation we, Generation Z, the millennials part duh, the homeland generation, the app generation, and my personal favorite, the selfie generation, right? These are all different naming conventions that we see, and the marketers are fighting over it right now. They're doing about this much research, but they're coming up with all these different reports because for them, this is about capitalizing economic opportunity in the corporate sector. But they're the ones kind of driving this. The scholars usually come after, but I've kind of jumped in the game here now because I have the good fortune that we collect 170,000 surveys a year on centennials and happen to think we might know what's going on with them a little bit more than others do at the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. But this is a generation of diversity, right, that's been born into this new century. And these are your learners, right? These are the students that are coming next. These are the students that are showing up on campus. They're mobile first and digitally intuitive. You know, what we know is what does that then mean from a pedagogy perspective? How can we ask our learners to learn traditionally when they've been like my daughter? So my daughter is a true centennial, right? So she's 3 years old. Any parents in the room? Is parents in the room? So my daughter, 3 years old, and I'm a first-time father. And my daughter was crying when she was maybe 14, 15 months old. And she's crying, wah, wah, wah. And my first move, because I'm a leader, right? And I've got a leadership toolkit. All of you as leaders, wherever you are, whether you're a faculty member leading your classroom, you're a department chair leading your department, you're a dean leading your school, you're leading in any other context, you got to have a toolkit. And you got to know what to pull out of that toolkit to manage and handle certain situations, or what lens to put on to read and understand certain situations. So my daughter was crying, so I went to my daddy toolkit. Move 1 in the toolkit, Keisha, I need help. Keisha was like, boy, you better figure it out. Move 2 in the toolkit was, is it time for a change? Move 3 in the toolkit, was it time for a feeding? Move 4 in the toolkit, hit her with the binky. Move 5 in the toolkit now. The toolkit is, I'm like rummaging now. I don't have many more moves left. Move 5 in the toolkit, I hit her with this nervous bounce that my wife and my father-in-law does, which bounces the child into submission. I went to the 5th move in the toolkit, and that did not work either. I then had my daughter sitting on my lap, and she went like this. She put her hand on my iPad. Now, you know if you hit an iPad with multiple fingers, something magical is going to happen. I can't tell you what it is, but something magical is going to happen. She hits the iPad with her fingers and goes like this. And next thing you know, John Legend's voice starts wafting through the air. We're just ordinary people, right? And so that music is playing. All of a sudden, wah, 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 wah turned into. She was less than 2 years old when she was already swiping. My daughter is now 3, and this is the conversation we have at 3. And if you're parents, you probably have some similar conversations as well. She'll say, Daddy, Warner wants her phone. You give her the phone. She can't punch in. But once you get in, if you try to put it on YouTube Kids or abcmouse.com, she said, no, Warner pick you what she want. Peppa Pig, until she doesn't want to watch Peppa Pig anymore. Pete the Cat, until she doesn't want to watch Pete the Cat anymore. Minnie Mouse, right? Voice, choice, access, and passions. Self-directed learning methodologies. A different identity system of who they are as learners. Not just race and ethnicity different in terms of who they are as learners because of the manner in which they've been socialized to learn, to engage technology intuitively, not as a matter of teaching and learning. My daughter is 3. New digital divide. Old digital divide, whether you were connecting or not. New digital divide, it's to what purpose are you connecting in the world? 40 million children go to schools every day that don't have high-speed internet access. The new digital divide is the children that are going to boarding schools, like where I went to school, which costs $59,000 a year to go to high school. And they have a maker laboratory that I'm sure rivals anything in this building. And the students that go to school in the inner city of Dayton, Ohio, where I grew up, where they don't have high-speed internet access, right? That is the new digital divide, and these learners are very different that are showing up who are mobile first and digitally intuitive. They are constantly creating and sharing content. They were raised in this Great Recession. And as I said before, now more than ever before, they are concerned about their futures and how they're going to ultimately make their way into the next level of their life. They are questioning everything. So we see that show up all the time. This is what the internet does for someone. It allows for three things to happen. One, it allows you to explore your passions and answer your questions 24/7, 365. So when I show up as a learner, I have a different level of self-authorship and expectation of my environments. Number two, it allows you to be connected. One of the themes that we're seeing in some of our focus group work is this generation never wants to be alone. They see themselves as being connected. They never have to be alone because they can always be plugged in. And then the third theme is they are able to have voice in the world. So when you are on your social platform and you are communicating in the world, you have voice in the world. So it allows for you to explore your passions and ask questions. It allows you to never be alone, and it allows you to ultimately put your voice in the world. I'm going to flash forward. So one of the things I talk about in terms of understanding diversity and inclusion in higher education is it's one of the very unique spaces where we have multiple generations who are all in the environment at the same time. So you've got boomers, you've got Xers, you've got millennials, and you've got centennials. Now, you also have the silent generation folks too, which are our emeriti and senior faculty members who just seem to just live long in the life of the institution. But you've got all these generations that are operating at the same time. And this is a chart that is in the new monograph that I will share that you can have. I'm not going to go into detail against it. But one of the questions that we asked in some of our research was, I use this social media platform constantly. So centennials constantly snapping, constantly on the gram, YouTube, they are the YouTube generation as well. For them, they believe they can be discovered in YouTube just as likely as someone back in the day who was singing in the backyard and believed they were going to be a star. Twitter and then Facebook. And this utilization profile is exactly inverted for Gen Xers and baby boomers, right? So Gen Xers and baby boomers are using Facebook most prominently, and then LinkedIn, and then it goes back from there. But clearly, you know, where they live and how they live, and even the choices of, everything is about not just words, it's about content, visuals, metaphor, digital content. And what we're trying to do at Boys and Girls Clubs of America is create more and more opportunities to leverage that with our young people who are coming forward. Anybody have this idea, know what it means to be live chilling? You do? What is live chilling? Give it up for her for knowing live chilling. That is exactly right. I have asked that question. How old are you? You're millennial. You know. I have asked that question all across the country, and you're the first person that, give me your information, I'm going to send you a book. I am going to send you a book and a Boys and Girls Clubs of America t-shirt. Live chilling. Live chilling. And so there's a new wave of platforms that are emerging right now, which are House Party, Fam, and Uvu, who are these, look at them, shaking their heads. Him with the beautiful high top fade. My hair used to grow that high back in the day. It doesn't grow that high anymore. Yes, so there's this difference, right? And I'm not going to further belabor this, but I wanted to just suggest this to you because how they learn, who they are, not just their surface level characteristics of diversity are through the charts, but they are diverse as learners, and they are diverse in terms of how they engage with technology. A couple key themes that we found: spend as much as 9 hours a day consuming digital media, much more sophisticated, expect to have choice and voice. They're not becoming digital ninjas. One of the things we talk about is diverse, economically vulnerable communities, particularly African-American, Latino, Native, first-generation college goers. They use the technology socially. They are being socialized to become the expert users of Snapchat. They are not being socialized or educated to become the next creators of Snapchat, right? And we see that happening more and more and more. That's why, you know, everybody's trying to do these different coding things, you know, code.org. And I have love for code.org. Don't let me say I don't. But doing a nanosecond of coding does nothing in terms of getting anybody here to the University of Pittsburgh to study computer science. We all know it's about quantitative skills and aptitudes, logical thinking and analytics. and having some type of a spark or experience that makes you passionate to go that pathway. But it really comes back to the quantitative horsepower. Digital engagement is oftentimes never having to be alone. This is a generation that is more connected than ever. But what's interesting, though, is they will disconnect from social media, too. You know, Xers, in particular, older millennials, they were overwhelmed with the social technologies. Because they grew up with it, they will shut it off to get away from the drama, to detox, to I'm not dealing with that. They will shut it off in ways that are very unique. Also, too, how they show up in those spaces. You know, my name is Mary, but in the in my Twitter account, it's Rosemary Bud 55. You know what I mean? You know, in my Instagram account, it's Hot Mama Marie. You know what I mean? And that is very intentional, so they can't be searched, they can't be found. And for them, digital is who, when, and how, and if I want, for how long I want. That's a very different mindset again. So this is the reason why you all need to go and download the Monograph, Voice, Choice, Access, and Passion, the new hotness from DAW. Who are the Centennial generations? How we capture their minds and hearts? What is BGCA's teen strategy? And last and definitely not least, I will work to get University of Pittsburgh copies of this information to share with you. I want to stop here and take an opportunity for some questions, comments, interaction with the community. Questions, comments from anybody?
Comments? Yes.
So are you leaving us hanging, not telling us how to capture them?
No, I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna keep going.
Okay.
I'm gonna keep going.
That's the question.
You know, in terms of capturing, there's a couple things. One, digitally engaged experiences, I think, are tantamount, right? And that starts to change the landscape of how we interact with them. And so one of the things I'm a big believer in is the more that we can have them to work collaboratively to create digital content and share that content in social communities, I think the better. The other piece of this in terms of just real world tactical recommendations is, you know, digital office hours. I think become really important for this community. Also, too, the ways in which, and this creates a conversation of risk and do we do it or do we not, but, you know, the degree to which we use text message and chatting with them, you know, to connect in. There's a part of what I write about in the same piece, too, where we say that all things digital are not good. And so how do you also intentionally kind of build out pedagogy in learning environments to pull them out of the digital space and to get them to engage materially? You know, these are all pieces of what we believe to be important. A second thing that we believe to be important, too, is, you know, the more that we can shape learning experiences that are project-based and live on their passions, right? So their passions, their interests, and then we bring the learning experience around those passions and interests, because this is a generation that has passion and they have choice. I mean, everything from how they choose their new Nikes to how long they stay on a website is different. And again, ultimately, I think there's some good things in that in terms of faster moving learning environments, but there's also a need to stay traditional. And so it's just a balance. Yes, sir.
So shouldn't our job be to broaden their horizon and teach them not? I mean, I have a lot of students that, I shouldn't say complain, that are surprised that their grades are not automatically entered in this highly computational website that lets them know exactly what their grade is at every minute of the semester instead of being able, I always tell them, I don't do that. And I tell them to step back and look in the mirror. They should tell them how well they're doing in the class. Not looking at a number on a website that lets them know what they're doing.
I think honestly, I think it's a balance. So a couple things. One, higher education is a dinosaur. The world they will go into to lead and work in will already be different. So I look at the post-secondary experience as how well are we preparing learners and leaders for the world. And in the world they go into, that information will be dynamically implemented. And they will be tasked to engage in big data analytic process, maybe not to crank the data, but to interpret the data and to interpret it immediately and to do it collaboratively across the world. So a part of it for me becomes, I think there's an opportunity for higher education to continue to evolve In the same instance, too, again, all things digital are not good, right? So I think it's a balanced proposition, but I do believe post-secondary institutions are behind the curve. And I do believe we've got to engage not just in becoming digital neophytes. There's a wonderful book titled Digital Leadership that was written by Capgemini and MIT, talking about this idea of technology, right? It's a two-by-two access, technology by human capability. In higher education, we can have all the technology in the world, right? Because we got the smartest people in the universe on our campuses. The question is how we, and the human capital side, innovate our pedagogy to not be digital neophytes where you got all this digital capability, but you have no human capability that matches it. And so I think somewhere in the mix there, I think it's building the right capabilities and it's evolving our pedagogy to meet the needs of these learners, to accelerate their ability to be ready. But yet at the same time, I think there's something very special and important about, more traditional processes of interaction. So one thing, I think there's pedagogy, and then there's administrative operational processes. How data gets entered into a system is an administrative operational process. That's not pedagogy. I think administrative operational processes need to go way up in the academy, way up. I mean, we're at Boys and Girls Clubs of America. We are a digital dinosaur. And we spend all our time talking about our data, right? And trying to use the data to do forecasting and market analysis. And, and we're in the business of helping young people, let alone some of the fields that some of these young people are going to go into. Yes, sir.
So in your book, you talk about how response to crisis management is behind the times and it builds a feedback loop where the response is just, let's get a message out there, and then it just ends up happening over and over again. When you're talking about centennials who are ahead of the curve, have their own voice, have their own way of doing things, and you're talking about administration in higher ed that is typically older, typically white, has not dealt with a lot of this, how do you get that group to be able to get ahead of the curve and respond to things that may happen before it happens?
Right. Yeah, so this is a visual that's in my book. It's this diversity crisis model of planning. And so one of the things we talk about in the book is we talk about this idea of the cheetah and the wolf, right? And a couple of the students in the room that actually used my book in their higher ed strategy class were like, oh, cheetah and the wolf. It's the cheetah and the wolf guy. The cheetah and the wolf guy is here. So what is the cheetah and the wolf theory? So the cheetah and the wolf is a metaphor that I came up with to talk about diversity crisis in higher education. So the cheetah will sit high on the plain of the Serengeti, right? And it's looking out at its landscape. And when the cheetah sees an antelope or a prey, it will go hurtling after that prey. And the cheetah is the fastest land mammal on the planet, right? Can reach speeds of high 60s, some have said 70s, and its strategy is very singular in nature. Cheetah maybe hunts in pairs, but never in pack, oftentimes hunts singularly, and their strategy is built upon their speed burst. It's a single speed burst where they either take down the prey or not. They can take down prey that is about its size, a little bit bigger, but not huge prey, and then whether they're successful or not, they then go back to the hill and they go like this. Until they have recharged. They can hunt maybe once or twice a day, right? That's what higher education does with diversity oftentimes. A crisis moment happens, right? And then there's this burst of energy. And then, whether they're successful or not, they come back and they wait for the next crisis moment to happen. So I talked about this diversity crisis moment. And so this was this model that I built out after, seeing this play hundreds of times across the country. So there's a diversity crisis that happens, and inside that crisis, it could be everything from a student gets shot. It could be everything to swastikas put on a door. It could be everything to an individual in traditional Muslim garb is accosted, whatever the case may be. A crisis moment happens. In that crisis moment that happens, there's oftentimes an internal and external stakeholder response. Students may rally. Faculty may rally, alumni may rally, community may rally. One of the things that's different in the 21st century is what happens in that internal response and that protest and demand. Because now you've got social media that turbocharges things. Now, I am a proud, amazing love of University of Michigan, my alma mater, which hadn't had a real diversity plan for decades now. And we had a new president had just came on board, and a man that has shown himself in the last 2 years to be deeply committed to diversity issues, President Schlissel. But when he first came to campus, he was not talking about a diversity plan. That was not on his top agenda items until #Black at Michigan happened. And next thing you know, there were hundreds of thousands of rehashing against what the black experience was at Michigan. And now you've got something that had sparked by a campus incident that when the response happened, it sets this energy to moving. Oftentimes when it happens, there's these protests and demands, and then there's this declaration of support. And it's almost like I talk about toolkits, right? I've never seen a president or a provost, irrespective of their experience with diversity or expertise in strategic diversity leadership, that didn't have the same talk sheet when it came out. We believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is foundational to our values and who we are. It is something that is part of the learning experience that shapes and makes institution X important and da-da-da and da-da-da. They have got that thing down cold. And then they got a second move in the toolkit, too, that we talk about, is they know how to commission a planning group. I don't think there's ever been a strategy developed in the academy without a planning group. Now, I also understand shared governance. I understand the collegial nature of the academy. I understand that the planning group is a cherished part of what makes higher education special. I also know that that is a place where good energy and good hopes go to die, right? And that's why going into that planning group with that innovation mindset in the beginning becomes so important, lest you don't get things done. And then they deliberate and they discuss. And they discuss and they deliberate. And they plan and they pontificate. And they research and they analyze, because there's one thing that we do in the academy better than anyone else. Damn it, we can do that research and we can pound that discussion and we can deliberate the issues, right? And then ultimately they'll get to a plan. And I've never really seen a diversity plan that didn't have, this is particularly campus-wide plans, that didn't have many of these dynamics. We want to improve the demography of the institution. We want to enhance the climate of the institution. We need to engage in diversity education moments with students, faculty, and staff. And last and definitely not least, we need a chief diversity officer to hold everybody accountable. Right? The diversity police. And my response to that has always been, if the president, the provost, and the deans can barely create any energy of accountability, how the heck is the chief diversity officer going to do that, right? That is an impossibility, because our institutions are not vertically crafted in that way with those strong systems of vertical control. At the same instance, too, you can build tactics that build more accountability in than what we have, but there's never going to be this autocratic world like the corporate sector. It's just not, nor should it be. This is the place of ideas. Then there's oftentimes an acceptance of the plan, and then from that acceptance of the plan, there's two directions we go, right? We can accept the plan. Oftentimes it happens at the end of the school year. End of the school year, what happens at the end of the school year? Students go home. Faculty go to their summer retreat somewhere or do whatever faculty members do. I don't know. Staff members, we stay on campus, keep doing our stuff, and in the fall, new students come back. Maybe that senior who was so vocal and did so much, she's gone now. Maybe that grad student who was the student co-chair, they're gone now. And the crisis that precipitated the moment, that happened 18 months ago. And now the energy and the campus has returned to meiotic balance. And the cheetah returns to the hill, ready to run. Oftentimes, there's no plan that's developed that has accountability techniques. There's no financing of the plan that's been mentioned. There's no capacity building effort that's been baked in. And there's no system and strategy to get vision and buy-in from a broad community. What happens is oftentimes superficial, and it has none of those elements. And so we refer to this as the diversity crisis model. And there's different points in the model, I think, where some of the dynamics I talked about earlier are shifting. Again, the nature of social media is shifting it. Things don't go away the way they used to. What's interesting is this centennial generation and millennials as well, they have a strong understanding of the social media landscape, and many of them have a desire to skew towards activism and social engagement. And so more so than Generation X for sure, and they're bringing these things to life. And so the question will be is, when things calm back down, do they light it back up again? And oftentimes to light it back up again, they need free energy in the system to light it back up. From an institutional perspective, I believe the institutions right here have to develop clear plans, right? Who is the group that is going to quickly come together to vet the issue? Who is the messenger? What is the response back to the students and to the community authentically? How do we say, is this, how do we take this issue and try to make it be, a one-day issue versus a 30-day issue versus an 18-month issue? All comes into how we manage it from an institutional reputation, crisis management perspective. All those things become very, very important. One thing about this generation of students, excuse my French, but their bullshit meter is through the roof. They are the most, they have a nose for inauthenticity. Why? Because as soon as they hit that landing site, if it's not authentic, what do? They click and they leave. As soon as they start talking to you and they don't think you're being authentic and straight and real, they want to click and they want to leave. The younger heads in the room going just like this. That changes the dynamics of what this whole thing looks like, because they used to leave and they'd be disenchanted and they'd have to go do a rally. Now they can leave. If they can find the right way, they can light it up and they can bring your institution to its knees. University of Michigan now, 20 months after hashtag happened, $85 million new plan. $85 million, which is now a pride point, because now the narrative is Michigan's returning to our roots of greatness and leading and innovating in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And we will again lead the conversation nationally, which is where we should be. Go blue. Leaders and best, forever valiant.
Yeah, you called it diversity crisis. It looks to me it's like a diversity change management plan. Why did you call it diversity crisis?
I call it a diversity crisis moment because diversity crisis is going to get me a lot of eyeballs. The diversity change management plan will give me some solutions. So I first wanted the eyeballs and then I got the solutions. But I called it the diversity crisis model because it's oftentimes born out of crisis. And what I'm offering is that the strategic diversity leadership model, by comparison, doesn't have to be born out of crisis. It can be born out of that perfect storm of those factors that have elevated the work, and we can develop plans absent crisis. We can develop strategies absent crisis.
In your book, the Diversity Strategic Leadership, there was a chapter, I believe a chapter that you talked about diversity matters. Is that
Diversity what?
The end, towards the end of the long chapter, I can't remember the title now, but you discuss some elements of managing diversity program.
Yes.
Could you just very briefly point a couple of them?
Absolutely. So one of the things that becomes really important in terms of managing your diversity effort and getting things going in the right direction is, how are we going to implement strategic initiatives in the diversity-related space? So I'm asked all the time, how do we get people on the same page, right? How do we get buy-in, right? So we know we want to do this new plan, we want to do this new initiative. How do we get buy-in? How do we get buy-in? What I've honed into is there's these three kind of basic approaches to activating change in our environments. One is you can drive change. Two, you can orchestrate change. And three, you can encourage change, right? You can drive it, you can orchestrate it, and you can encourage it. Driving change. Driving change is all about holding people, departments, and institutions accountable, right? It's all about that. And so inside of it, what are some of the ways we do that? One of the ways we do it is we take diversity and we connect it to the financial systems of the institution. So what do I mean by that? We make diversity engagement a part of merit review, right? It is a factor or a category in the merit review process for an individual, a part of a process. Number two, we can make it a part of budget allocations. If you don't illustrate your plan to elevate this strategic priority, that has an implication on your budget. A third way we can do it, we can make it a part of promotion considerations. We want individuals who embody a spirit of diversity and inclusive leadership who are our department chairs, who are our deans, who are our presidents, who are our provosts. And we're going to build that in not as the only criterion, but as a criterion that is a part of the selection process. We can make it a part of how we hire. Each and every individual that we want that comes in must be an amazing scholar. They must have the potential to have a game-changing revenue generation possibility in terms of their laboratory. They must be strong and growing in terms of their translation ability and maybe the capitalization of their work and commercialization of their work. But we could also say we want them to be an individual who brings an inclusion orientation to their work as a scholar and, more importantly, their work as an educator. Those are things that are in our control. All those are tools of accountability that we can build out. The second dimension, orchestrating change. Orchestrating change, I refer to that as more, again, this idea of how do you get folks moving? How do you get the strings playing? And how do you get the pianos playing? And how do you get the tenors involved in bringing that orchestra together? One of the things I think is important is we have to create a spirit of entrepreneurism on our campus. One of the beauties of the collegiate environment is that our campuses have a spirit of entrepreneurism. Faculty are very entrepreneurial. Campuses are very entrepreneurial. They're constantly responding to RFPs. They're constantly putting publications in the world. We're constantly pursuing grants and gifts. We're pursuing things. That's entrepreneurial energy. So one of the things I think is important is how do you take that entrepreneurial energy and incent diversity change work? So a couple key tactics that I think are important there. Diversity challenge grants or innovation grants, professional staff grants, external grant writing, having dedicated efforts where we're pursuing money externally to benefit diversity. Again, every institution, and when I say institution, it could be campus-wide or it could be school or college, should have a diversity innovation fund. A competitive fund that the best ideas to spark innovation possibilities can come out of. And it becomes also, too, a great fundraising development opportunity. You know, I think that is possible not only for individual transformational gifts, but foundations, corporations. But again, diversity innovation funds, I believe, are so important. And then last and definitely not least, is this idea of encouraging change. Now, if we were to think about each of these as bar graphs, the bar graph that will be the weakest will be accountability. Incentives will be nearly as weak. And the one that we use all the time is we want to convince folks to do the right thing. Oh, I don't want to give you a course buyout to figure out how to diversify your curriculum. Oh, I don't want to give you any type of financial incentive to engage in this classroom climate student achievement project of gender equity and inclusion. I just want you to do that. I'm not going to give you a buyout on that. I'm not going to give you any incentives on that. And so what we usually do is we put things over here in this persuasive place, trying to convince people to do the right thing. And at the end of the day, that is a part of it. But a well-balanced portfolio of activating ingredients and agents that I believe will catalyze new possibilities requires some of all of this.
Excellent.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I just wanted to comment that I wanted you to really say that because you detailed these things in your book, and we have been following a lot of this in our model for the university, and some of the department chairs here will see some of these things in the thing that we do. So I do want to comment on that. But there's something else that fits into this that is coming up. I'm sure you're going to be answering some of those questions in our closer session. But I just wanted you to perhaps address that for this audience. The question that comes out a lot of times is, what is it? What is it for me? And this is coming from faculty. Why do I have to do this work? And you already mentioned it is not in my promotion package. It's not recognized. So how can we modify the model for faculty to see what is the value for what to do in diversity? Is there a model out there that we can use to really go deeper with my colleagues on diversity?
You know, it's a great question, and I'm of the belief that there's always going to be some individuals that find this work to be very important and are going to grasp it and lock in on it. There'll be others that I think we can build an intelligent business case for them of why to do it. And then there'll be others that will always only do it if they are held accountable to doing something. right? And there's these 3 different groups. That group that's in the middle, right, where they can be inspired to do something, there's a couple different techniques that I find to be important. One is, I think, showing them some of the data and what is possible if they do some things maybe a little bit differently, right? And this is particularly from a student angle, right? And so we've done a lot of studies that looked at campus or classroom climate and ultimate implication for student achievement. And what we found was that, you know, what Claude Steele refers to as stereotype threat, meaning that individuals who are coming from gendered backgrounds or race ethnicity backgrounds and are in hyper underrepresented groups oftentimes get different outcomes. And in many ways, those outcomes are often not predictive based on their standardized indicators coming into the course. There's something happening in the environment, right, that is causing them to shut down, causing them not to be as connected and engaged. And it could be as simple as how study groups are put together. Study groups that are put together intentionally by randomization takes all of the diversity issues out of the creation of the group. To tell folks, well, you're going to work on a group project, choose your groups, and you're in the minority in that environment, creates an immediate opportunity where you're probably not going to maybe be invited to be a part of the best group, or you're not going to have that diverse experience. Intentionality. What I found is that showing faculty the implication of some of those things from a data-driven perspective oftentimes is very illuming for them to want to be a part of something different. Another thing that I found to be important with faculty is how do you create action-based research projects that faculty lead around the diversity and inclusion space? And let me give you an example of that. One of the things that we did is I partnered my department with the Dean of Letters and Science. And the research question we wanted to answer was, why are underrepresented students underperforming in the gateway STEM courses? The introductory pre-calc calc sequence, the introductory chemistry sequence, and some of the other courses. We wanted to understand underperformance in those areas. And we worked with a faculty-led research center. And so we incented that project. Inside of that, we were able to get to a lot of actionable based understandings of that challenge, and we were then able to move forward with the design of how courses were sequenced differently. We moved some courses from a 3 sequence to a 2 sequence, or excuse me, from a 2 sequence to a 3 sequence. We did some other things where we put in place some new advising approaches to help students to think about not just their semesters, but their summers as a part of completing the degrees at a certain level. You know, we created forecasting models that helped us to understand with 94% accuracy if a student completed, student completed 36 credit hours by the end of their 3rd semester, with at minimum of a 2.5 GPA, the graduation rates for all students were over 90%. That was simple Markov modeling research that we were doing in an institutional database to bring some data analytics to the conversation of why students weren't graduating. You know, we then took that data and worked it combinatively to do a student classroom climate study as well. So now we took the courses where we saw underperformance, and then we went in and did the classroom climate study and got new layers of understanding. I have found that when you can make the argument or make the process of uncovering it a research project, faculty become much more engaged. The last example I would offer is this. One of my dear friends is Professor Juan Gilbert, who is a computer science professor at the University of Florida. African-American male. We went to Miami of Ohio together. Juan has the largest computer science lab at University of Florida. Juan's whole research agenda is on culturally relevant computing, right? He's got more research money than anybody. He's got the biggest lab of anybody. Juan produces more black PhDs in computer science than the entire rest of the nation combined, right? So in this instance, diversity is a revenue-generating point of difference that is hitting the institutional bottom line in very substantive ways. Now, there's only one Juan Gilbert, but there are ways that resource pursuit, grant pursuit, can be connected to diversity and can be a part of the institutional bottom line. And I think that's another way to get faculty really engaged in the conversation. Yes. Others, questions, comments from anyone, anywhere? Yes, ma'am.
So you said that University of Michigan spent $185 million. Can you tell us, like, first of all, how they actually got that much money?
Yeah.
And moreover, have they actually spent that money and over how many years?
Yeah.
And what they use it for? How much was allocated for each of these?
Absolutely. So the new plan is just starting now. So it's an $85 million commitment, which is the new plan, which was developed in 2016 and goes live this coming fall. So the money has yet to be spent. Inside the money, some of the money was already inside the institution and was being used for diversity-related matters, roughly 60+ million. There's roughly 20 million that's new, that is coming from a strategic reallocation process over the course of 5 years, 4 or 5 years. And so there's about $5+ million that's coming in new into the system. And then the other is a reallocation of current dollars that was already in the system in the various schools and colleges. The new dollars that are coming into the system, there will be competitive energy for deans and other units to compete to get those dollars. In addition to that, there's also a strong effort that's being put in place to make diversity, equity, and inclusion, and this plan, a major part of the development activities of the schools and the colleges moving forward as a major strategic priority of their campaigns at a localized level in those schools and colleges, but also at an institutional level as U of M kind of rolls out more broadly around these matters. You seem like you have a follow-up question. Do you have a follow-up?
I think that I would like to get more, clarification or elaboration on what kinds of things those would be.
Sure. A couple things. And one thing I'll say about the University of Michigan, and I'll pivot it broadly, their plan is readily available. So they have a beautiful institutional website, and I would encourage all of you to please download it. There are some new things that they're putting in place that are state of the art in terms of the process of what they're doing. The tactics of what they're doing, the tactics are the tactics, right? I don't think there's new tactics. There's just applying the old tactics with rigor. So for example, let's take faculty diversity. One of the things that they're doing is they have created a faculty diversity program that is designed to recruit individuals who are already at the tenured level to the institution. There's a new program that they're building out inside of that. There's also postdoctoral fellowship opportunities that are being built into that, where the idea is that those postdoctoral fellows would convert to tenure-track faculty. Those are not novel or new ideas. Those are ideas that we've had in place for a very long time. What is novel and new is resourcing them, and what is novel and new is trying to build a program around those postdocs to ensure that they not only finish the postdoc, but that there's a natural bridge for them into their faculties upon reaching a certain level. And so that's a program that I wouldn't call it innovative, but I would say that it was very traditional, but it's one that's proven to work. There's also inside their faculty diversity effort a broader conversation around diversity and inclusion being a part of every job description moving forward for every faculty search. There's an effort that centers around a comprehensive training approach that every committee would go through a certain type of training experience to ensure that they were best able to cast a broad net. Those things aren't innovative. Those things are things we know that are part of a good strategy, and they're simply putting them in place. And those are a couple different examples, but the plan is readily available, and it is easy to download. The thing I would say as well, though, is on faculty diversity. In my book on chief diversity officers, I wrote an entire chapter on the best practices for faculty diversification. And inside of that, I laid out, everything from dual career programs to future faculty fellow outreach and recruitment efforts to how institutions are approaching measurement in terms of measuring faculty diversity, not just in terms of head count, but looking at turnover quotients, meaning how many women were present that came into the institution that were new additional hires versus simply replacing those that left, using a turnover quotient where you're looking at staffing levels at different times. I mean, lots of things that are very rich. And I wrote that chapter intended to give all the promising practices in one place to help institutions build their strategies. Yes. Yes, sir.
So, couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
So, you mentioned very clearly that at some point, or always, you need to make the measurements to see the efficacy. Otherwise, it's all theoretical discussion.
Yes.
And I completely agree with that. But oftentimes, at least my knowledge, I'm not an expert, those measurements tend to be the bottom line measurements. How many of such and such honey you have? How many of this have? Neglected in that is any attempt to measure intent and activities, because those are, by definition, difficult to do. More effort is needed to do that.
Yes.
And sometimes they're nebulous. But to me, that's more important. So what, any suggestions of how to incorporate in their intent and activities in that?
So a couple things. One is I think that institutions should develop out a scorecard, right? That allows for you to kind of build out, your indicator and measurement plan associated with your diversity efforts. One of the things that you're talking about here is inside of the indicators, there's what we refer to as lead indicators and lag indicators, right? A lag indicator is the indicator that we look at that says this is how many brown folks we got, this is how many women we got. It's the ultimate outcome that we may be looking at. The question that you're saying is what are the lead indicators, right? Which to your point is more connected to the tactics and the things we're doing and requires more effort to look at them and more effort to collect them. My thing is this, to use good management science, it's not always going to be easier. Sometimes it is going to require more effort, right? And so I think a part of it is what are some of those things we should be tracking and measuring, right? So I want to show some case study data or a national study, piece of national study data, which I think will be helpful to make my point. So Smith, Turner, Osei, Kofi, and Richardson, 2004, did a very interesting study where they looked at 3 AAU institutions, right? 3 major research institutions, and they reviewed their search processes over the course of 3 years. So they looked at every search process at these institutions over the course of 3 years. They analyzed nearly 700 searches, and they asked a very simple question. When did a diverse hire happen? Just when did it happen? And in this instance, diversity was defined as primarily as underrepresented minority. So they wanted to know when an African American, Latino, or Native hire happened. And they also complemented their institutional database studies with examining the experience of Ford Fellows, Spencer Fellows, and NSF Fellows. So these were all diverse fellows who were coming out of these very prestigious fellowship programs. And the assumption would be that they were being highly recruited, highly sought after, fought over. So this was a study that they did. One of the things that they found was that in the hiring patterns of African Americans, American Indians, and Latinos, that unless one of these tactics that's in the purple was a part of the search process, then a diverse hire never happened, right? So unless they had a special diversity was really infused in the job description, unless there was some type of a target of opportunity hiring fund, unless there was something that went on in one of these tactics, they never had a hire. Only 14% of African Americans came through just a regular search that had no diversity themed strategy embedded in it. For American Indians, 100%. For Latinos, more of a mix where nearly 60% of them came through just a general search. But the short of it, what they found was that if the institution didn't put these very aggressive tactics in place, they nearly never got a hire. And so what they started talking about was these interrupting the usual techniques that needed to be built into the process. So what are some of these interrupting the usual techniques that might exist? One was having someone on the search committee who is a designated kind of trained expert to help them find diverse candidates for the applicant pool. Another interrupting the usual promising practice or tactic was having a committee be tasked to search until the pool was diverse. Not the hire, but until the pool was diverse. You keep searching until you find them. Another interrupting the usual tactic was to go where these diverse individuals were in terms of their conferences. It's to go to the NSBEs. It's to go to the Southern Educational Boards where there's hundreds of diverse individuals who are coming out of certain types of fields and recruiting there. It's having additional resources that are in place, not just to bring in your 3 traditional candidates, but we're going to bring in that 4th candidate because we've got this great, amazing, diverse candidate. They're a part of this search, but we got some other ones too, but there's some additional resources you can tap into. Having an institutional rationale around faculty diversity and why it was a part of the educational narrative of the institution. All these were tactics that she found, and if one of these tactics weren't in place, or more importantly, multiple of them, then nearly no hires happened. And so one of the things that I found is that a part of faculty diversification is a question of intentionality. And so we actually, I don't know if I pulled that data here for us today. Oh, I didn't pull that data, my apologies. I had some other data, but I didn't pull it. And this is that faculty turnover quotient I was talking about in terms of being able to get a quotient to understand the degree to which you were just replenishing the folks that left, right? So you hired a person as a Native American female in the junior faculty, and then after 4 years they left, and then you hired another one, but you're just replacing that person. And so this gives you a much more robust indicator system to understand the degree to which the faculty that you're hiring are new faculty, or you're just, replenishing those who left. It's a very simple tool. Yes.
So this is, I hope I can articulate this thought.
Yes, sir.
It's to do with these efforts being systems level effort versus individual effort.
Yes.
The reason I say is that I intrinsically don't feel that we should expect every faculty member to do so-called diversity efforts equally intensively, or whatever it is. Because the thing analogy comes to mind is if I was building a basketball team, I'm not going to have all centers and all forwards and all guards. Everybody has, and the whole system works. So this, when the evaluation issues come, it should not be brought down to the individual faculty level. They should be free to do, as long as they have the basic understanding of acceptance of people and caring and whatever. But it's more of a systems level approach.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I am a systems level thinker, right? And so that is the way I believe strategy happens that leads to material outcomes. I believe that there's not a system level commitment to it. I think that oftentimes that's when we don't get the types of movement and progress towards outcomes. So I think it comes back to a question of values. An institution or a department or a school or college that wants to say, this is a part of our highest strategic values, they build it into their systems. An institution that wants to say, this is something we think is an important thing to do, but we're not going to take that step to build it into our strategic values and systems, those are just two ways to approach it. I personally don't say, every institution must do it the way I'm articulating. But what I do say is that the institutions that do it the way I'm articulating are more likely to get different outcomes. That's all I say. And institutions that don't choose to make it something that connects at the individual level, it's just their choice. I think, connecting at the individual level of an accountability, that is a risky proposition. It is not to be done without some serious vetting and conversation, particularly amongst the faculty, right? To really talk about what this means and to talk about the implication of it. I can think back to a case study at the University of Oregon, where the University of Oregon was going to require cultural competency training for every faculty member. That blew up, so fast. And the reason that it blew up was, some very conservative think tank organizations were contacted by some members of the faculty, then they came to campus, and now you had a diversity crisis moment. Right? And now it's all over the media, and now the provost is saying, well, I just don't know, and ultimately they ended up retreating away from it. In the same instance, too, when I was at the University of Connecticut, we had a required 3-hour diversity training experience for all faculty and staff. But it was authorized by the state of Connecticut that all state employees would have it. We just tapered it in our state, in our institution, to be sequenced to issues that were relevant to different groups. I've also seen places where they will build in just very simply on their activity statements that they collect annually from faculty, a question that asks about diversity and inclusion. And just the very act of putting it on the statement, not even with a hammer of what you did or what you didn't, the very act of putting it on there starts to create some natural energy for folks to say, man, I need to have something to put in there. These are all just tactics. I don't at all purport to say they're the only way to go. They're just the tactics that I found to be helpful in getting things done. Other questions, other comments from anybody? one of the ideas that I wanted to put up here is this idea of temperate radicals. So temperate radicals is a concept that was created by Stanford University business professor Deborah Meyerson, who did a study of diversity and inclusion and change in the corporate sector. And one of the things she found was every time she saw real meaningful change happen, she found these temperate radicals. And these temperate radicals were individuals who had a lot of institutional capital, right? But they were radical because they were trying to change the system by working within the system to make it more inclusive for others. But they tended to be very credentialed with social capital. So they were in this instance, they'd be full professors or tenured professors. They'd be white males. They'd be individuals who sat in roles of leadership, who are skewing towards these ideas and are pushing the agenda with courage. In that environment, they were VPs, they were white males, there were individuals in leadership roles. But again, I found that we have to cultivate more temperate radicals. One of the things I try to do when I come to campus is I try to cultivate more temperate radicals because I want somebody to feel more emboldened after the session to be able to lead and get involved in different ways and try to move an agenda forward.
Okay. There is no more questions and no more comments. Let me please remind you to fill out the evaluation sheet in front of you. And that's very, very important. At 1:30, we're going to have a closed session with Dr. Williams. We have some very specific strategic questions that we want him to help us. He's going to be meeting with the Diversity Committee and also the School of Engineering wide Diversity Committee and some other senior staff. So if you are a faculty, if you want to join that closed session, you can still do that. It's going to be just about 1 hour. So he's going to have a moment to rest, get some water to drink. But please join me in thanking him and appreciating him.
The last thing I wanted to make sure I say before I go is, and you'll get this whole deck, is I'm a deep believer in this. Commitment without currency is counterfeit. And so institutions that are really committed, ultimately there's going to be currency connected to that commitment. There's going to be financials connected to that commitment. There's going to be some pain associated with that courage to get real things done. There's got to be some commitment. We can think things are important. We can think things are nice. But when we're committed to them, particularly in the academy, we elevate them, we prioritize with funds and resources. So commitment without currency is counterfeit. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here. Thank you.